Hello, everyone, and welcome to Babbling Irons. Today, we're joined by Ibby and James from E20. So, it's going to be a bit of a different format today for those who've watched us in the past. We're going to do a lot more of a conversation with the guys here. We're going to talk about all things West Ham. And first off, James, if you want to start the conversation, we've just had a bit of a chat beforehand, but feel free to
take
raise
it away.
Opinions on West Ham right now.
Well, basically, it's come out, isn't it? That obviously Craig Dawson is heading north. Looks like he's going to Wolves, and then obviously you got Antonio, who's been linked to go in there. For me personally, I think Antonio has done his time at West Ham, and that's hard for a lot of fans to admit. Don't get me wrong; a lot of younger fans will not be able to admit it because he's the highest ever goal scorer and etc. But I think his time is done at West Ham, mate. I think he's been here a long time. I think he needs a fresh start, and we need to move away from Mikel Antonio to something fresh and new, really, in my opinion.
Yeah. Maybe, how do you feel about that? I know I've seen you on Twitter today. You've been a bit vocal about not wanting him to go. So let's hear the opposite side of the conversation.
I think for me, it's more to do with the fact that I think we need to realise that at this point in time we're in a relegation battle. And I don't think there's any running away from that at the moment. We're in a relegation battle. We've had relegation forms since the start of 2022, and now we're in 2023 and we're 17th. So I'd rather not. We know this club doesn't have the greatest of luck, and if we were to give Mikel Antonio away to a team like Wolves, you just know in the last game of the season when we need to stay up, Mikel Antonio relegates us. So I mean, apart from the cliche stuff, I mean, I'd just rather not strengthen a relegation rival. And there's also certain other players at the moment who are touted being linked to Everton that we liked in the summer in Arnaut Danjuma. That I think that we should be a bit tactical and sort of swoop in and make sure that we don't allow them to take a player that we wanted as well in the summer and sort of let their armory become a bit more weaker for the rest of the season. So I feel and getting rid of Antonio is just a stupid idea. I think in the summer it's probably maybe the time for him to leave the club, considering he's 33 years old. Obviously his contract's running down as well, and there's also he's also not looking the happiest this season as well since Gianluca Scamacca's arrived. So I feel if we can just keep him for the next 6 months, I think that's probably the best option.
Guys, obviously you mentioned about Scamacca obviously coming in and that seemingly having an impact on Antonio's game time. Do you think that's had an impact on his attitude on the pitch? Because he has looked, I would suggest, far less active out of possession. In possession, his confidence looks devoid of any of it. And obviously after starting the season as the main man to now not being, quite frankly, the main man, do you think that's kind of either knocked his confidence or is kind of put his nose slightly out of joint? How do you guys kind of look at Antonio at the moment?
I think his ego's shot, mate, if I'm being honest. When West Ham were looking for a striker, I think Mikel Antonio was looking for a striker that was lesser than him. So what it was, he was going to be the main man, and he was going to have a striker under him who was going to be up and coming, so to speak. When Gianluca Scamacca arrived, I think Antonio thought, hold on a minute, I'm going to be second choice here. And I think his ego's shot. I think he's a bit arrogant, if I'm speaking the honest truth, because if Mikel Antonio was doing it in games and being a major force in games, I don't think any West Ham fan would complain. But the problem is he ain't. And that is a major reason why I can understand what Ibby's saying about not getting rid of him to a relegation rival. I get that. But I would get rid of him. I think this is the only time you're ever going to get rid of him, really, because I think we need something fresh. He shouldn't be here this season, and he is, and that's on the ownership of the club and the way it's being run at the minute. But for me, his ego and his attitude's completely out of joint, and I think he just wants a fresh start somewhere else.
Yeah, do you guys think it's a bit at the moment? We seem to have a lot more links going outbound than we seem to as coming in, and there seems to be more concrete interest or at least activity on players going out than coming in. Do you think that's a concern? Do you think the club actually has targets in mind for these players, or we're just kind of trying to wing it as we go through this window because we're not sure what's happening with Moyes as well?
Personally, I believe on that. I believe that you are right. I think we're going to wing it. I think we've always winged it. I don't think we've ever had a real strategy. I think the summer was the first time I've really seen any sort of strategy in place, any sort of cohesion in terms of Rob Newman and the board and David Moyes always been on the same page.
You said the only disjointed moment in that though was Danjuma.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, Danjuma was the only disjointed one. So I mean, it's quite funny actually. People talk about Danjuma's attitude problems, and then people not highlighting Mikel Antonio's behaviour this season. It's quite ironic, to be fair. So I mean, I think personally, we're going to be looking around at loan deals, maybe trying to pick any sort of bargains if we can find any. I think also the end of the window is going to be quite active as well in terms of the domino effect and people coming available on loan. Maybe there's quite a lot of players at big clubs who have their future in doubt as well at the moment. So I think personally, I think we might have to wait until the mid to the end of the window to see a bit of activity from West Ham. But there is that player in question in Danjuma who is almost certain to come to the Premier League this window on loan or even maybe permanently. That I feel that would be with Maxwell Cornet, sort of where's Wally disappearing.
I think he's saying exactly the same thing. Where is Mick gone?
100%.
So I think it could be the perfect sort of signing, loan to buy or a loan deal for Danjuma. Sort of have that other little attacking threat.
Do you guys feel that we're maybe this window looking more as to what other clubs are doing and then acting on their curtails as opposed to being proactive? For instance, like with Terran Moffi, we only seem to be interested once there was interest from Southampton. Obviously, Danjuma seems to have come back out again with now being interest with Everton. Do you think we are going to act only when other clubs act or agree as opposed to being proactive and going and getting the players early?
I think also one thing that no one's really mentioned is with the manager situation at the minute and the way West Ham are playing, I think we're between a rock and an hard place at the minute, like for what's going to happen with transfers. Like, for instance, for argument's sake, if he goes and loses the next 2 games, I think his position becomes unbearable. Don't get me wrong. I think he stays here to the end of the season. But from an ownership point of view, do they trust Moyes at the minute with new signings? Like, because some of the signings he's brought in haven't really hit the ground running. For me, they have to be proactive. I think Mark Noble's in there now, which is a good thing. But West Ham should have these players ready to go for Wolves. Like, these players should be here, and like West Ham should have the players in before they get rid of players. It seems like they do it the other way around, which is always a worry because when the team knows you need a striker, the value goes up and the loan fee goes up, and then it becomes a problem. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know really. I think the next sort of 10 days will decide it for me. Well, I agree with what Ibby's saying about a lot of players have got their contracts coming to an end this summer. A lot of good players have got their contracts coming to an end. But for me, West Ham ain't got time to hang around. Like, the next 2 games are probably 2 of the biggest games West Ham's had for a long time, especially in the Premier League. Because if it does go the way of bad, then we are in a massive dogfight. And who's really going to want to come to us?
Yeah, so one of the questions that the Babbling guys had before, off air, obviously, was that do you actually think that really what we should be doing is, with Moyes' future in doubt, be taking the transfers away from him and actually entrusting Noble and entrusting Newman, because they're most likely going to be essentially going to continue if Moyes goes. Should they actually be in charge of implementing that style in terms of what we're want to play, what players we want to bring in, and then ask Moyes to just coach, but then catch 22. As we've seen, if Moyes isn't convinced on a player, they don't get in the team. So
yeah,
it's one of those things of, do we maybe take a longer view as to, we know these guys are going to be in, so these guys are making decisions, or do we still entrust Moyes in the window?
For me, and I hand it over to Ibby, I think it's a massive catch-22 situation with West Ham. Massively. I think if you bring players in, we've got to hope these players that he brings in hits the ground running. So if you do get rid of a Dawson, you bring in another centre-half, he's got to hit the ground running because he might be needed straight away. And that's a problem at West Ham. A lot of our players, especially from the summer window, haven't really hit the ground running. Like, Paqueta has been he's been good and bad in some games, and Skamaka's the same. And I just feel like that the board are a bit worried about giving him players and giving him more money. If they do get loan deals, like for instance, if Dan Juma turns up, if we sign the Nigerian striker from Lorient, then great. Don't get me wrong, right? We need players at this club, but it is a worry that we're relying on new players to come in and try and save our season to a point.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me on to a point, and maybe you might be able to on this as well, that there has been talk about the old guard coming in to try and help out the team. But when you go through our 11, it's predominantly the old guard that has played. Obviously, you know, Fabianski in goals, Sufal has gone back into right back, Cresswell left back. Obviously, again, has been out injured. So obviously Dawson, I guess you would class part of the old guard, also not been at the same standard. Our midfield, old guard again in Rice and Souček, both not been at the same levels we've seen in previous seasons. And although Rice has been good, he hasn't been last season level as yet. And then even when you look at midfield and the attack, it's still predominantly the old guard, bar Paqueta and Skamaka. So it's interesting, as you say, we're relying on the new players because the old guard also are not kind of bringing that together. So is this something Moyes trusts to kind of give more of the more established players time, or does he look to the loan market? Does he look to the transfer market in which to kind of oust one or two of those players to essentially give them the injection they need to understand that they're not playing to the right levels?
Well, personally, I think with the overview of this situation, I've actually thought to myself as well, and sort of reviewed it myself. And I think West Ham as a club are in a massive transition. If you look at the whole spectrum of, we have taken a massive gamble by letting the World Cup just drift by and kept David Moyes after that Leicester game. We've come back and lost our first two games, and sort of nothing really changed with the system, got the tweaks here and there, but still not being able to successfully put any sort of patterns of play together while going forward. There's no patterns of play. Apart from just lumping it in the box, there's not really anything we're relying on. Maybe a bit of brilliance from Benrahma or a penalty or a free kick maybe, but I think we've left ourselves in a position where the recruitment's going to be really tough now because we haven't got a new manager that we can really look at and be like, okay, he's going to bring in his own players, or we don't have the funds because we spent 160 million, but he wants to bring in a couple of loan players. But we know how picky Moyes is anyway. We've obviously got Mark Noble in as sporting director, and it's sort of a catch-22. If Noble and Newman go and swan off and get their own players, are we really going to see them in the team? And is that going to cause a rift between the board, Moyes, Noble, Newman, and is that really good for the environment and the situation we're in at the moment? Don't think it is. So I think we're in a situation where we've gambled big time on David Moyes turning it around. We've just basically we've put all our eggs in one sort of place and sort of said, okay, David Moyes, you're the man. You have to turn it around with the 160 million that you spent, the players that you've got. If you want any loan players, we'll go and get you the loan players. If it suits our budget, if it suits the money we got, we'll go and get you the players. If it's too much for us, we can't really acquire those players, and you're just gonna have to get us out of this situation. Hopefully, you can do something in the FA Cup or the Europa Conference League, because I think that's the situation we're in. I think if we were a bit more proactive and I think if we had the sort of resources to go and pick out someone like a Tedesco or pick out Ruben Amorim or something from Sporting and really go out there and put our necks on the line and get a young manager with fresh ideas before the World Cup happened, I think that would have been the perfect scenario for us. I think that would have been left the recruitment so perfectly set up for January with Mark Noble coming in, Rob Newman. They could have all come together as a collective and thought, okay, what positions do we need to fill? But now we've got David Moyes, who seems a bit out of ideas. Funny enough, he's relying on a player who he didn't want originally. So at the moment, the only player that's keeping him in a job is a player that he didn't want originally. So sort of everything's just sort of collapsing around Moyes' world at the moment. So I think we've left ourselves in a precarious position because we've just basically said, David Moyes, you're the man. You basically have to save us with whatever you can do. Because at the moment, recruitment, are we really going to put our necks on the line giving David Moyes another 50 million? That's not going to happen. Probably don't have the money anyway, but would we really trust David Moyes with it? Probably not. Is he going to be long-term West Ham manager? Probably not. So I think we've just left ourselves in a situation sort of in the Premier League, just making sure we keep safe this season. That's just my perspective on it.
You raise a good few interesting points there, and I'm going to kind of break them down in a bit and ask you guys' opinion. So obviously, one you mentioned about being a transitional season. One of the questions I will ask you guys in a bit is do you feel that's a bit of a cop-out because we're saying it's a transitional season because we brought in a number of players and because we had a bit of a turnover, but really does that not also point to this transitional period to a lack of planning in the previous January window where we decided not to go buy another striker, not to get a left back, not to maybe go and get a centre midfielder, that we're constantly leaving summers to be in such a big job that transition is really just a cop-out for poor planning. And we're going to have another transitional season next season because, again, we're going to have such a large turnover of players leaving because of players out of contract. We're going to need to bring in players. And also our homegrown quota next season is drastically going to drop. So we're going to have to go out and find homegrown players, which we know are incredibly expensive. So is it just a lack of planning and also a lack of utilisation of an academy system, which could also supplement our homegrown level, which we haven't done pretty much, if we're honest, over an 11-year period where we've had, God rest his soul, cold, Sullivan and Brady at the club, where we've only really brought through two players, and that's Rice and that's Dean Garner. How do you guys take that kind of transitional thing? Do you think it is a cop-out, or do you think it's just how it is with West Ham?
For me, it's an excuse. As simple as that. I understand when people say about a transition period, but West Ham in the last 2 years have been very, very good. And these players should have come in to sort of build on that progression at the club, not make us go backwards. Now, that could be down to Moyes. That could be down to the style of play. Something he said earlier on, which I was listening and listening, he makes it 100% right. We have got no style of play. No one knows what West Ham's style of play is. Like, are we a counter-attacking team? Are we a pressing team? Are we a team where basically we're waiting for like teams to come onto us and then do the damage that way? I honestly don't know. For me, when I hear transition, I hear it's like an excuse to me because I see other clubs like Brentford, Brighton's name too, who go out, they sign players and they always develop. And the best way of summing it up on that sort of aspect is you look at Brighton, they've lost their best manager that they've probably ever had in their history. They go out and get another manager and their philosophy just doesn't change. Their style of play don't change, and they still are the same team as they was last season, if not a little bit better. So, yeah, I think the transition side of things is a bit of a cop-out. Obviously, I agree with you about the youth. I'd like to see Harrison Ashby in this team, but that ain't going to happen. I think he's out the door. And when you say about the youngsters that we've brought through, one of them is a Chelsea academy player who they rejected. So he isn't even one of ours. So we've got a lot of problems at West Ham. West Ham, it's always been known for the academy of football, but we just don't use the academy anymore, which is a bit of a problem for me.
Yeah, there's always a conversation if they're old enough or they're good enough, they're old enough. But again, there are players who've come through in the past that weren't that good when they first come through. Jack Collison, I remember having an atrocious debut against Arsenal when I think we lost 2-0 at would have been the Emirates at that point. And other players that have come through that weren't at the level, but we had to persist because we needed those players. So again, it's one of those things that we call ourselves the academy, but we're not really giving much to the academy. And as you say, likes of Harrison Ashby is now likely to move. Again, why would you stay when you see other players playing ahead of you? When you do play well, you're then out of the team. Probably see the same with Ben Johnson as well. He will probably go the same route because, again, his development is consistently stunted because he gets in the team, plays well, is removed. And it's, whilst people were saying, he's not good at this, he's not good at that, it's also not acknowledging the fact that arguably he has been our best fullback over the past probably 18 months, but his development is consistently stunted because he's constantly removed from the team in favour of underperforming players.
Totally agree. For me, like, there's a lot of issues at West Ham. It ain't just on the pitch; it's behind the scenes. And I think a lot of fans have started to see it. Well, you've only got to look at the academy players that we've let go over the last year. Like, some of them players have gone on and done some good things. Like Sunderland fans rave about Elise. Like Birmingham fans say the same about Longelo. And it seems like West Ham are in a bit of a dilemma for me. And the way I look at it is with this dilemma is that do we have time to develop these players into the side without getting the right results? Like, I don't think could fans accept that? Now, the answer to that is I honestly don't know. Like, I think West Ham have gone up a level now where they're fighting on fronts of like European football and top 10. And to have a young player in there who might be inconsistent is a bit of a problem, because then you don't win games. Do you know what I'm saying? But I'm not against the idea of playing the youngsters, certain youngsters, because I think if they're good enough, they deserve to be in the team. That's the only way they're going to get in there.
And we also tend to get that Declan Rice wasn't that consistent when he first started. And obviously the very first few games he played in midfield, especially under Pellegrini, he really struggled because of what Pellegrini wanted him to do. And obviously the Liverpool game got subbed, didn't play for a few games before until he asked for a loan, and then he was told, no, shut up, go back and train, put your head down, and you will be back in this team. Good bit of man management, really. He kind of gave him a baptism of fire, sat him out for a few games, and then said, right, now you are going to be my main man, go and prove it to me, which he did.
Yeah.
But again, it's unless you challenge young players, you're not necessarily going to see what they're like. And bringing them on for 5-minute cameos, again, you're not going to see what they can do. But kind of moving on from that, I guess one of the factors in maybe youth not being played, not being tested, so it's very simple to say they're not good enough, is potentially the manager, who, again, hasn't made any real discernible kind of playing style this year. Should we have moved on for him pre-World Cup, or do we now say, unless we get 4 points from the next 2 games, thank you very much, it's time we move on from David Moyes?
I personally think I actually had I heard something from Gio from Hammers Chat, who was talking about this like cycle of 3 games and being in like okay, if he wins this, then he's okay for a couple of games, and then if he loses, his job's on. I just hate that, because
he did the same with Bilic, and it went on for about a year.
It's ridiculous. I don't think any other sort of owners in the Premier League are gonna implement that sort of 3-game rule. I'm not surprised in the right ownership, but the most concerning thing is there's so many concerns with David Moyes, but I think the real concern is seeing teams like, even at times Everton. I saw them play against Man City, and the teams around us, and especially Wolves. I saw them play. I watched their game against Aston Villa as well. Their patterns of play in the final third, you can tell that they're training on patterns of play. And what I mean, if anyone's watching, I'm sure people are clever enough to know what pattern of play is. Just basically movement off the ball, or little sequence that a team plays. In Man City have their own patterns of play, but we don't have any patterns of play. It's all done off the cuff during the game, and that way, as an elite football team in the Premier League, you have to have patterns of play, and that's a big reason why we don't score enough goals from open play, because we just don't have any style. We don't really. All our goals are so sporadic. They're sporadic. They're either a set piece or a moment of brilliance from Skamaka or Ben Rama, or a manager can never last as long if he doesn't have any implemented style of play. We know under David Moyes we're gonna be solid. This season, probably an exception with the injuries. We haven't been as defensively solid because we had to keep changing the back four. But with a Gerd back, we've seen a big difference already, and with Kurt Zouma on the way back, we'll see a big difference there. So I'm not worried about defensively. I'm just worried about
what's given Moyes the time. The fact that again is going to be coming back. The fact that Zouma will be coming back. That he's getting that stay of execution, because there's mitigating circumstances. Technically, what some people may say is having the stronger players come back and then having a much more full strength team. That's half.
I don't believe it's about. I accept that it's the defensive issues have been a problem, and I'm so happy to see a Gerd back. I'm so happy to see Zouma back on the brink of returning. I think that's going to make a huge difference with the distribution from defence. instead of just Dawson just having brainless moments of just lumping upfield, we're going to have a good sort of knocking it into those little pockets of space. And Zuma, for how he isn't probably the best in possession, he isn't as bad as what we've got, and he's still competent in possession at times. I feel a big problem is the style and the patterns of play, the attacking patterns of play. We don't have them, and that's a huge worry. All teams in the Premier League have patterns of play. They have sequence of, oh, that was a nice little move there. We don't have that. It's just either a cross or a set piece or a penalty or a free kick, and that a manager will never, ever, ever, ever survive when going forward they can't score a goal from open play. And at the moment, this season, we've hardly been able to score from open play.
Yeah, so
go on. This sort of reminds me, you might even remember this, the 2010-2011 season with Avram Grant.
I've said to the Babbling guys, many said this is reminding me of the Avram Grant season.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
This is like players are coming out at the start of the game and making their own tactics. It has that feel about, 100%. I don't trust what's being said. Let's go out and do this. It feels, it just has so much of that vibe about it at the moment. And when you hear what Moyes is saying and he's constantly bemoaning luck, it just seems like a blinker is on. And
what it was in that sort of era, I'll never forget the game. Arsenal at home, we lost 3-1, and Grant was going to go. He was literally on the verge. It was like basically a new manager was going to come in. It was going to be Martin O'Neill was mentioned and all that. And then the owners decided to stick with him and said, you know what? No, we're going to stick with him. We're going to see this out. We're going to get some players in January. And that sort of, in the end, sent us down.
I think Martin O'Neill walked away after because I think he was at the game. It looked like Grant was going, but he didn't like the fact how everything got leaked. And then he basically walked away. And then also instead of just going, shit, let's move on to the next manager, they kept Grant. It went down. But, Ricky Rich is saying big up to you here as well, James. Many thanks to say again for liking the channel. But making a point as to, we've talked about Moyes being in a dangerous position, and obviously today has probably been the most, I guess, concrete link that we've seen in that West Brom's manager has been eyed up as the plan B. Obviously saying it could be a disaster. Obviously it could go the other way. It could be a stroke of genius. But I don't know if you guys have watched much of West Brom this season. What you think about?
I watched the manager at Huddersfield. I thought he'd done all right on a small budget. I'll give him that. He's gone to West Brom. He's done well. I will say that. But for me, this is not an ambitious manager in my eyes. Like, you look at Wolves, you look at Aston Villa. They've gone out and got two people who have won trophies. Right, I know Villa got knocked out the FA Cup the other day. I understand that, and like Wolves should have got through against Liverpool, but they are winners. And West Ham's mentality is the sort of West Ham's mentality has to change. Basically, in my honest opinion, I think if the fans were like, right, this is not acceptable now. We need to be competing for top 10 every season. Then I think things would be a lot different. In my opinion, I think some fans go, well, if we finish 7th, 8th and we win something, it's a good season. Well, it is a good season, but it shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't be having to sacrifice one for the other. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think he's a good manager. He's a good Championship manager. But for Premier League, honestly, I think there's better options, in my opinion.
Yeah, Lee is obviously saying again about the academy. It's not going to get a good run out with him under pressure, and obviously he's too scared to play attacking football. And there are some statistics that back that up when you look at as to how deep our defensive line is, how bad our, how much we allow the opposition team to play. Now, granted, it's improved the last 2 games where we've stepped up the pitch. We've actually been a lot better on our press, but some of it feels a bit too little, too late, as if he's been so, no, this will work. And it does look like in my opinion, looks like he's lost a few of the players. I don't think everyone is happy. The likes of Fornals, his smile seems to have gone. He doesn't look to be the same player. Obviously, we mentioned about Antonio doesn't look happy. And I think, there is probably that growing discontent within the camp for one reason or another around the situation we're in, certain players playing over others. and it does look a bit disjointed at the moment. And again, I'm struggling to see where Moyes gets his next result to get us through. And we mentioned around about Christmas time, that was probably ideally the time to change. So if we were to change, do you guys have any managers out there that kind of, you would like to see, and any reason why you'd like to see them at West Ham?
For me personally, there's it would be a tough one because of the release clause, etc. But for me, I think Ruben Amorim is a really interesting one. I feel like we have. I feel like we have the base with Gerd to sort of the style he plays is sort of a three at the back, sort of a 3-4-3, and the way that he's transformed Marcus Edwards as well, who went there, who was formerly at Spurs. Some of the I feel like people think a 3-4-3 is quite defensively. It's all about defending, but it's actually a really expansive way that he plays. I'm not going to say I watch Sporting every week, but I'm going to say that I've seen them enough in the Champions League to know that the bravery, especially of the way that the wing backs play with and the wingers, how they get inverted and sort of the striker drops deep. I feel like it could be perfectly set up for us, especially like if you look at the way Scamacca drops deep and how if Paqueta played in the 2 with Declan Rice a bit deeper, and I think the glaring issue as well West Ham at the moment is the fullbacks. I think we need to really heavily invest in fullbacks. I think that's the base of any team these days, especially in this modern era of football. Fullbacks are so important, and at the moment,
statistically, they get the ball more than any other player in the team. Mm-hmm. So you would argue that it is your base point really for possession because of how much they have in a game.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, I'll give it over to James now, but I feel for me, Ruben Amorim, he's a young manager, and the way he's done, especially in the Champions League, it's a gamble. I think every manager's a gamble. I think Emery for Villa's a gamble, especially with his sort of pragmatic sort of way of going about it. He hasn't really proved himself in the Premier League. Lopetegui's also a risk for Wolves in terms of his style of play. Has he got the right players for it? And I feel like Amorim's the same, but I feel like we have a base of a squad that can work under someone like Ruben Amorim, especially with the centre backs that we've got. And I think it'd benefit players like Ben Rama as well in terms of him playing as a sort of inside forward in a 3-4-3. We've seen the best out of him in that position. I feel like he could develop a player like that. I feel like Scamacca could just thrive under him. I think Lucas Paqueta at the moment, we're starting to see him improve game by game, and he's just showing those flashes of magic now where he just looks head and shoulders better than the opposition's midfield and our midfield as well. So, I feel like he'd be a good appointment personally. Yep.
How about you, James?
I totally agree with everything Libby said. Sporting Lisbon manager's 37 years old. He plays a nice brand of football. He develops players, like Libby said. Marcus Edwards was a top youth player. He's turned him into an absolute well-beater over there. He signed him up from another Portuguese side and really developed this kid. He knows his stuff. He knows how to adapt. He knows how to change in game when it ain't going right. I think he's the man, really, mate. Like, he's the man. He's highly rated. He won't be at Sporting Lisbon for long. If I had to go for another person, I would go and look at Company and Craig Bellamy as a double act. Mm. I think Vincent Company's got that winning mentality, and what he's done with Burnley in just a short space of time on, let's be honest, a minimal budget. If he had a big budget, and he could do some damage. What it is with a manager, we have to get a manager who can attract very good players. Like, we have attractive good players, but I don't think some of these players have come for David Moyes. I think they've come for other means, in my opinion. So the Sporting Lisbon manager, Ruben, would be the man. If not, I would go up to Burnley and take Company. I really would. I think he's an excellent manager in the making.
Yeah. Do you guys think that the biggest hurdle is the fact that in the whole time that obviously he's not around anymore, but Gold, Sullivan and Brady have been in football, they've not paid compensation for a manager? Do you think that will be the biggest stumbling point with any manager, that they're only looking for one that is either the cheapest to pay the compensation or is actually free? Do you feel that is going to be one of the actual factors in the decision, as opposed to going for the best quality manager?
I think personally, even if Moyes lost the next 2 games, I don't think he goes, mate. I really don't. And like what you just said, they've not got the ambition. I think if West Ham had Kadinsky in charge, for instance, and he was the overall owner of the club, I think Moyes would have been gone a long time ago, and he would pay the money to bring in someone of class. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't think Mr. Sullivan would do that. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a worry. It's a worry. West Ham won't go over to another club and pay £20 million release calls for a manager. They just won't do it. They will look for the cheapest option. They always have done. A manager that hasn't really been mentioned, but he's a free agent, is Luis Enrique. I think Luis Enrique would be a very good manager. Just finished with Spain, done 10 years. He's got nothing to prove in Spain. He might want a new challenge. He's never managed in the Premier League, so he would be another option. But I am concerned about this with regards of with the manager. It's one thing I will say. And if you're going to do it, you need to do it now rather than later. So I think if West Ham go out of this window and nothing's happened and they decide to get rid of him, say, at the end of February, then we are literally hoping and praying that we survive. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
No, I totally agree. Like for me, my probably first choice is someone that no one's mentioned here is actual Gallardo, who is the manager at River Plate. Obviously, he's brought through some exceptional players in the last few years. Obviously, one of those currently plays for Man City. Another one has been part of a £120 million bid from Chelsea. So, that's just 2 of the players he's brought through. I think Ezekiel Palacios he brought through as well, who currently is playing at Leverkusen in Germany. So that is a guy who, again, plays a 4-3-3 formation. Whilst he can operate it in a very defensive way, he can do it as very kind of attacking. He's very adaptive. Again, likes to play like a 4-2-2-2 as well sometimes. And is a manager that's been talked about in line with Barcelona. Also had a conversation with Southampton before they went with, I think, Nathan Jones, their manager. So he is someone who is also going to be free, funnily enough. I think around about now his contract expires for River Plate as well. So it's another manager that I would like the club to look at. It's a manager who's brought also the most successful era in River Plate's history as well. So he hasn't managed in Europe, granted, but the Argentina league isn't exactly an easy league. It's a very physical league. If ever you've ever watched it, it's can be a bit no holds barred sometimes. And again, it's a manager that is young. Really, probably should have been in Europe about 2 or 3 years ago, but just kept faith with River Plate. And it's one of those managers that could be an absolute masterstroke if we used to bring him in. We also got Ange at Celtic as well as another absolute quality manager with what he's doing there, with some really good offensive football. Again, really adaptive play. There are managers there, but obviously we've got to be willing to pay for it. And therein lies potentially the problem for West Ham is, are they willing to bring in a manager? Because it's going to require not only a compensation fee to Moyes, potentially compensation fee to another club. On top of that, then there's also going to be demands for a transfer budget as well. So when you start to look at those things, when you start to fall into the idea, and maybe the old traps of, under a Gold, Sullivan and Brady dictatorship or custodianship, as they like to say, over the last 11 years or so, that we have seen them take a cheaper option. We have seen them not go for the ambitious one. Obviously, Moyes worked out for them twice by not going ambitious. But is that the same route we're going to go again? That's where my concern is.
Boys, I'm having to love you and leave you. I literally have to get off. Quick emergency. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see you guys soon back on the channel. Cheers for having me on.
Thanks, no worries.
Have a good time, mate.
Yeah, cool. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. So, how do you feel, James? Do you think? Do you feel that we are going to kind of push for a new manager, or do you actually 100% believe that we're just going to stick with him and Moyes is going to be the manager to the end of the year?
I think he's here to the end of the season, mate. I really do. Do I want that to happen? No, I don't. Listen, I'll openly say I would like to have seen Moyes gone before the World Cup. I think the World Cup was the perfect opportunity. Let's be honest. Like, you had a 6-week gap there with like mini pre-season where you could have got a manager in, you could have got the players together, The Arsenal game could have been a free hit, and the Brentford game could have been the one where he sort of worked his way into the job.
Yeah.
I am worried. I am concerned about this season. I've been saying it on my channel for quite a while. I've been doing the spaces and I've been speaking to people. And the 2010-2011 era with Grant is very, very similar to this. Like It's like the same old thing. Like we've got a manager that wasn't good enough, but they wouldn't change, and basically it just went from bad to worse in such a short period of time. And let's be honest, when we did go down that season, we fight into the end, but we did eventually go down. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think Moyes is here to the end of the season. I think the ownership of this club, obviously what's happened with David Gold is very, very sad. David Sullivan is the majority shareholder of this club and he still owns the club. I think he'll set up in the summer. As long as West Ham don't get relegated, I think David Sullivan is looking to sell up and move on from West Ham. So would he
say then that because they're potentially, we're talking about the board, don't have a long-term stay or don't envision themselves in the long term, that actually their view is completely short-term, and as has been quoted by a well-known West Ham fan site, that if Moyes was available now, he would be the precise manager they'd be looking for. Do you think that is the antithesis of their attitude to this, is that this is the manager we would go for, so why not stick with him? And if we're not thinking long-term, make it someone else's problem in the summer.
Yeah, I think our targets have changed, if I'm being honest. I think our target for this season was to finish in the top 10 and have good cup runs in all cups. I think our targets have completely changed. I think now this falls on staying in the league. It's just the way we're playing. I think anyone who doesn't think we're not in a relegation battle because we're like 3 points or 6 points off of 10th or 9th or whatever is deluded, in my opinion. I look at it that you have got the ideal manager for this sort of scrap. So what is the point? Get rid of a manager and bring in another manager really who's going to do the same job, basically. There is no point. So I do see it like that. The only problem is if Moyes continues to do what he's actually doing, then he will send us down. That is as a given. Like if you consistently be stubborn with certain players and certain moments and getting bad calls wrong, like substitutes and things like that, then it's going to mount up in the end. So I'm concerned. Obviously, the next two games are massive. They are, and they will decide where our season is going to be heading. If we win the next two games, then we've got a bit of breathing and a bit of respite, and we can sort of start looking up the table and down. If it goes the other way, then I am very, 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 very nervous because in 2003 we went down with a very, very good side, and we're never too good not to go down, in my opinion.
No, exactly. So we've been a bit negative in the last part, but do you see any positives at the moment? While looking at around the club or looking at how we've played recently, is there any types of positives you are seeing that you hope then continue or at least spark something in the team to pull us out of the mire? Are you seeing anything positive at the moment?
Yeah. Aguerd is an absolute brilliant signing. Absolute brilliant signing. I think if we can keep Naya Aguerd fit for the rest of the season, then he's going to be an absolute gem for us. Mm-hmm. I think the midfield situation with Souček has been a bit of a problem. And I think Paqueta is slowly getting there. I agree with him, what he said. But I just need to see a bit more from him. Do you know what I mean? And I think what it is, West Ham need a win from somewhere. They need an ugly win. Like for Wolves on Saturday, I will take a 1-0 boring game just to get a win under their belts. I think once they win a game, like in the Premier League, then I think he'll breed confidence. And I think they might sort of kick into gear. The problem is that they just don't look like winning the game at the minute. So there is some players in there that obviously are doing all right. Aguerd's a good player. Paqueta is a talented footballer. I'm a big fan of Syed Benrahma. I think Benny has proved a lot of doubters wrong, but I think he needs a bit more help from other players around him, like Bowen and a few others. But it has been a bit of a negative season so far, which is a shame. Obviously, we've got the Cup, FA Cup, where if we beat Derby, we're in the next round of that, and we've got the conference still. So we have got positives to happen. It's just that we've got to make them positive, really. And until that time, then there isn't really a lot to be happy about.
No, exactly. It's getting that first win and getting that monkey off our back to then allow the fans to start feeling positive, because obviously it is tense at games once we concede or when we're in a game, because we're just waiting at the moment for something not to go right, which has been the case. But let's end on a positive. As you say, again, coming back into the team has seen a difference in that back line. It has improved it. It has been quality since he's come in. Obviously, the new midfield three, whilst I think everyone has their objections one way or another as to how that personnel is used, it has been more positive than what it has been in the past. And obviously we have seen Biketa, we get in there. But I think we'll probably end with that. There are some signs that some things are going in the right direction, but there are a lot of things we need to resolve and need to sort. And I think the consensus is we've got 2 games probably of Moyes, unless he can pull the rabbit out of the hat. In my view, 4 points is the minimum. Anything less than 4 points, and we have to look to move on, especially the following 3 games, which are incredibly difficult. Man City. We also obviously have Tottenham and Newcastle in that period of 3 games as well. So no easy games in the Premier League, as we know, but if we don't get 4 points in the next 2, it is a monumental feat in the next 3 games to kind of turn the tide, I think.
Do you think, just to sort of round it up, do you think that the next 2 games will define us? Because in a way, that's the way I look at it.
Personally, I think, these are the winnable games. And if, regardless of how Everton played against Man City, I think it's sometimes easier to play up against the big teams when you have zero pressure. It's in those games where you have to win, where you make it count. I think if in the next 2 games we revert back to, I guess, the Arsenal performance where it was a bit gutless, then I think that tells us everything we need to know as to where this team is going. If we don't get 4 points, then pressure massively ramps, and I'm not sure if the current setup can handle the pressure. And I think the Frankfurt game was a prime example of that was a team who couldn't handle the pressure in the end. We should have beaten Frankfurt, but the pressure got to them by that stage, and obviously the silly red cards that we very well know of. But pressure, I think, is what told in that last part of the season, and we're seeing it again. I think if the pressure starts to ramp up, I think certain individuals in the team will start to go within themselves. But again, with the likes of Zuma coming back in, Aged coming into the team, hopefully that will give some more confidence to the back line. We do need the likes of Fabianski to step up more as a leader, I think, on the pitch.
I agree.
He is a vice captain. Even Cresswell, I don't think he does enough as a captain either. He tends to just mill around sometimes. So I do think they're players that have to now stand up and be counted and start to actually be the players that a lot of fans are saying they are. Again, other players that have been maligned are starting to step up. So it's one of those things. We don't get these next 2 games, or these next 2 games don't go very well, I think then, we are in deep trouble, because the 3 games after that are not ones where you're going to be able to get some confidence. So it's these 2 games could define actually where we go, or where we are come the end of the season, because unless we're going to beat the next 3 after that, we're going to be in a position where we could be bottom of the table by the end of in 5 games' time. If you consider if we don't get the points here and the next 3, we could be bottom of the table.
It's so sad, right? It really is. It's so sad that we've had 2 of the best seasons that I've probably seen at West Ham, like yourself, for a hell of a long time. And like we're now sitting here and like in January and thinking to ourselves, we're worried about possibly being bottom of the table by the end of February. Do you know what I mean? It is absolutely madness, really. But do you know what? This is partly on Moyes on that occasion. It's also partly on the ownership of this club. Sadly, it really is, and that's a major concern. Like, and why they've allowed this to carry on for so long.
I have a question for you here. So, for the handsome fella on the right, that must be you, James.
It's definitely you, mate.
So, where do you see us finishing this year if Moyes does stay on?
I'm worried. I really am worried. Like, and that's no joke. Like, I try and keep a positive spin on it, right? But it's very, very difficult at the minute because I'm looking at it and I'm seeing a lot of seasons. I remember the 07 season, the 2003 season, the 10-11 season. I'm starting to see a lot of issues where have we got a lot of people who could manage in a dogfight in this team? And the answer to that is probably no. Like, we've got one player in this team who would probably fight for the shirt, maybe two, in Rice and Downs. The rest of them, I don't think they've got the sort of balls to fight like for the shirt in this situation, and that is a major worry. But what it is, like we discussed earlier on, Moyes is in a situation where he's been here before. If he keeps us up and we do something in a cup, then no one will care. Do you know what I'm saying? It's very black and white with West Ham at the minute. I don't know whether you agree or not, but a lot of fans will go, if we finish 15th and we get to a cup final and we win a cup or something, no one will care where we finish. But the problem is that we don't look like we can win a game at the minute in the Prem, and that is
it's a papering over the cracks kind of thing. It's like
exactly
the Europa Conference. Now, obviously, there's some mitigating things in how we put the team out in games prior to the Europa League, but again, it papered over the cracks of where the problems were, and then January highlighted it by not making any moves. And again, the Dithering Dave aspect came out. Even in the summer, we were too slow in some cases in moving for players, and the constant talk of I need time to integrate them in. It's like, but then you're buying the players later in the window, so you're also hamstringing yourself. So it's a tricky one. I do think that even with Moyes, I do think we could probably finish seventh. I feel that we would be about 17th, maybe 16th. Yeah. But it's one of those things where we arguably have a manager equipped in which to keep us out, but at the moment he's not finding the answers. We luckily drew the last game, but that could have very well been 6 defeats in a row had some other things gone in a different way. So by all means, we are not out of the woods at all. And
I totally agree.
2 games, we massively have to step up. Otherwise, we are going to be at the bottom of a mountain with no oxygen, hoping to climb. So
I totally agree with you, mate. I really do. And I think, obviously, the next 2 games will show that. Like, if West Ham go to Wolves on Saturday and they put in a good performance, and listen, I would settle for 4 points right now. I don't think it's enough, really. I need to see, even against Leeds the other day, last Wednesday, like a week ago, West Ham go to Leeds. They're in control of the game in the second half. First half was poor. They got away with it in the first half. But second half, they did get in front. That control of Leeds. And then the problem is, we're not only fighting on the pitch, but Moyes' sometimes tactical awareness of leaving things a bit too late and he goes a bit too early. He's come into play, and he proved it at Leeds. So we will see what happens. But as I say, we have to. Something's got to give eventually. Something has to give. Now, whether or not it's at Wolves, maybe. If we don't get the result at Wolves, I expect there to be signings through the door ready to go against Everton at home. Because that's a major game for me.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think if the Wolves game doesn't even resolve end in a point, and then obviously we come to the Everton game, pressure is going to be on. That is going to be one tense crowd in that game against Everton. And if the result starts going, then the crowd is going to turn. It is going to be that infamous toxic West Ham. But it's not necessarily toxicity. It's the fact that it's a bunch of fans that are demanding that they see better. And we have every right to demand more. And if we're seeing how it is, yes, we boo. If you boo the players at halftime, not something that I necessarily do myself, but if you do boo the players, it's your right to do so. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's incumbent on Moyes to get those players performing. And if he can't get them to perform, or they don't feel they can perform for him, he has to go. Unfortunately, he is the one that has to fall on the sword. You can't change a whole team in January. So it comes to a point of...
I think they've lost faith with him, if I'm honest. If you want me to be truthfully honest, I think they've lost... I think when you see him, and I mention this quite a lot on my channel, even with Syed Benrahma, with the way he has been... But some people are very sort of polarising with Penny. Some people like him, some people don't. Right, it's as simple as that. I like him. I think he's not a bad player. I think a lot of fans make out he's a worse player than he actually is, in my opinion. So, way he's treated him, and Benny's trying to perform, and a lot of the old guard have just not turned up either, really. Like your Bowen. Like Bowen last year was excellent. This season, he's just not the same player. So, we will see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's where we'll end it. We've got 2 huge games coming up. We've got a massive January window as well. We do have, no pun intended, many irons in the fire, but at the moment we don't seem to be using any of those irons at all. So
Exactly.
let's hope that we see an upturn in our fortunes over the next couple of games. And yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, James. Ibby, obviously
No
not
worries.
here, but thanks very much for coming on. And the one last thing to do, which is come on, you irons.
Come on, you irons, please.